Here are some places that I do not think that you should publish in, and I'll give you my reasons. I've been working in this field of academic writing and publishing for the last 15 years, and I've worked with hundreds of PhD students who are trying to finish their PhD and then hopefully get a job as a professor. And the following list are what I'll call questionable publishing outlets. You should ask important questions before you publish your research in these areas, because publishing in these places may not help you very much and may bury your research rather than promoting it, like publishing in a good journal article. The first questionable place to publish in is chapters in a book. The problem with books are that they're very hard to find and to cite. We don't have a lot of authors who cite book chapters. The convention is usually to cite journal articles. Book chapters are also hard to index online. In a way, publishing in a book is like burying your research in a hole in the ground. It's very difficult for people to find you, to cite you, to read you, and therefore, especially early in our careers as PhD students, a journal paper is more valuable than a book chapter. Another reason why books can be a problem is, in my experience, often book projects start very well. You know, if one person has an idea for a book and starts to collect research papers to put it together, but the book idea will kind of die along the way. It will stretch out maybe several years, and then it will never really get completed or published, and so your research may be trapped, waiting, and may actually ultimately fail if the book is not published. But if you publish it in an article, you're going to get faster exposure to your research and ideas. Another thing is that many times evaluation committees for universities don't think a book chapter is valuable. They may give no points or very few points to a book chapter relative to a journal paper. Second area of questionable place to publish is the non-peer-reviewed academic journals. Now, we love peer-reviewed journals because peer review is the only way we have to judge the quality of a research paper. I know peer review is mafan. It can be a pain. I know. However, we still need it so that others will know that our research has been evaluated by others who are professional in our field and can be trusted. So check to see if your journal article is peer-reviewed before you submit. Third, graduate student journals. Now, student journals are peer-reviewed by students, not by teachers or not by other researchers. For that reason, the quality of these journals can go up and down a lot. For example, if the students are great this year, the journal's great this year. But when those students graduate, maybe new students come in, they don't care as much, and the journal will drop again. It's kind of high risk to try to publish here. Now, I can think of two good graduate student journals, one in education and one in law, and they're both from Harvard University. And I think it's a good journal just because it's Harvard. I can't really think of another example of a long-lasting student journal besides those that has a good reputation over time. So be a little concerned if it's only a student production. Note journals. Now, a note journal won't publish full research articles. It will publish research notes. Sometimes we call these the short communications. Sometimes they're called letters. Now, a research note is not the same as a research article. Usually a note is much shorter, maybe 2 or 3 pages. And it may just talk about some technical detail rather than talk about a full study with a full literature review and all of that. Now, notes, the problem with notes are that they're very useful, but many times evaluation committees do not treat them as a full research paper. They may give half points, quarter points, but we would like to get full points, obviously, if we can. So if it's possible to add a little bit more information and get a full research paper, we would prefer to get the full paper rather than just a note. Review journals. Now, Review journals just publish literature reviews. A literature review, and you probably have read these already, don't have any new research in them. They just summarize a lot of previous research and then come to some important conclusions based on that previous research. They are very important for our domain, and we are grateful to the people who write them. However, for a new scholar, for a PhD student, for example, they are very difficult to write. Not only are they difficult to write, but they are even more difficult to publish. And I say this with a heavy heart, because in my class, over the years, we have submitted and published hundreds of papers. And we have tried at least 8 times in my laboratory courses to submit and publish review articles, and we have failed every time. Editors will often tell us, we do not accept unsolicited review articles. Basically, editors like to invite reviews, often from very senior scholars in the domain, and if we are young, small potatoes, no one's interested in our review yet. So it's high risk to try to write this. Another thing is it requires a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and then low chance to be published. And then finally, if you publish one, it goes to your evaluation committee, and someone on the evaluation committee may say, well, it's only a review article. It's not really a research article, half points. So you can see the high risk with spending a long time with a review article very early in your career. Local journals and new journals. Now, of course, we are very proud of our good journals, but there are some, when I say local and new journals, I'm talking about journals that just start maybe in your department or your university. It's the first time, nobody ever had a journal before, and they decide to start a new journal in your department, and they ask you to give them your paper. I don't think you should give them your paper for a new journal. Here's the reason. 80% of new journals die before 2 years. That's right. It's very hard to start a new journal. Basically, it requires a lot of infrastructure and time and reputation. And if you can't keep your journal operating for 2 years, then the journal will die, and your paper will die with the journal. And therefore, you lose a good high-impact paper that you can't republish again. So I would wait until after 2 years. After 2 years, if the journal's still alive, okay, maybe we'll think about it. Actually, I also read that the SCI will not consider adding a journal to the SCI list until 2 years as well. So 2 years seems to be kind of the golden time to consider sending your paper to a journal. Electronic and non-SCI. Now, we like to have our journal online, but one issue that I've seen in several universities that I visited and have talked with is that they have a policy where internet-only journals may not be equal to a hard copy journal. There's still a bias in the domain, and it could be changing depending on your domain. In some domains, there's a bias against the internet-only journals. So to be safe, we like to see our journal hard copy and online, so we have the credibility of the hard copy and the accessibility of the online together. If it's only online, it may lack credibility. If it's only hard copy, then people may not be able to find it. So we like to have both. And again, because we're here in Asia, we care about SCI, SSCI a lot, and we hope that our journal can be on that list. Here are some better places that I think you should publish, and I'll tell you why. I have ranked these from the easiest on top to the most difficult on the bottom. The easiest journals, in my experience, to publish in are the regional journals. Now, regional journals means only for our part of the world. For example, Pan-Asia Pacific Review. You know, if you're from this part of Asia and you're in this field, then you can submit. That way we don't have to compete with everybody. We just compete with our neighborhood, with the people who are right around us in this local region. And in my experience working with students, I think that these journals have higher acceptance rates than the journals that are going up. The next I would recommend are newer journals. Now, when I say newer journals, I mean over 2 years old. If a journal is over 2 years old and still alive, and maybe just added to the SCI list, we are interested in this journal because often newer journals are hungry for papers. They're still struggling to find enough papers to publish every month. And so if we send them our paper, we may get a fast review time, and the rejection rate may be better than it is at an older journal that has many authors competing to get in. Third, interdisciplinary journals. Now, interdisciplinary journals are journals that publish between domains, like between biology, psychology, economics, and computer science, for example. If you can work with an author from another domain and submit your paper to this interdisciplinary journal, in my experience, you have a pretty good chance of publishing. In fact, interdisciplinary journals are the fastest growing area of the SCI. There's a lot of these between domain journals that are multiplying. So consider how you might work with someone on this. Fourth are the field journals. Now, field journals are the journals you're probably most familiar with in your domain. For example, I worked in the photonics department, for a long time, and we have the Journal of Display, Journal of Photonics. Those are narrow fields within the broader field of electrical engineering, and those are competitive, but they're not as difficult as usually there's a few top journals in every domain, like the New England Journal of Medicine, for those of you in medicine, and those would be examples of disciplinary journals. Disciplinary journals are usually the top general journal for each domain, and they have also high rejection rates, sometimes 80, 90%. So they're good for your career, but they're hard to publish in. So for a new scholar, we often will start at the easier journals at the top first, and slowly, as we become more established and safer in our career, we will try for those more difficult disciplinary journals at the very top. Let me mention the three types of publishers that we have of journals and how this will influence our publication decision. In every domain, we have journals that are published by associations, universities, and companies, or commercial journals. Now, an association journal would be, for example, IEEE. This association is very common in electrical engineering, and they produce a lot of journals. We also have associations in medicine. The American Medical Association, the JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, is an example of a journal published by an association. Now, association journals are usually a good choice for us, especially if we have a close relationship with that association. If we are a member of the association, even better. If we have gone to conferences for that association, that can be helpful. The next one is university journals. Now, university journals is the one I have a problem with, because often university journals prefer their own teachers and students. And if you doubt me, just go to your library, get a university journal, and count how many people come from that university compared to all the other universities. It's common to find 50% from that school and the rest of the world sharing an additional 50%. That happens because it's a very natural bias for the school to prefer its own teachers and students. The editor comes from that school. It's sponsored and paid for by that school. So be concerned a little bit about those university journals. Now, commercial journals are owned by companies like Elsevier, Sage, Springer, for example. And these companies will own and operate the journals, and I believe they're the least likely to have any bias and the easiest to publish in from a bias perspective. So if you're concerned that, for example, your nationality is working against you, a commercial journal, I believe, is least likely to have that bias against other schools. And the other thing about a commercial journal is that the editor changes often, and often the editor comes from new schools or from new institutes. They don't always come from the same institute like we see with those university journals. Here's a checklist that we will go through before we send our paper out to a journal. These questions need to be answered. They're all very important. The first question you should ask about the journal that you are considering is the journal peer-reviewed? Remember, peer review is very important. In fact, I remember recently I was at a conference and we had an editor there from a large journal. And one of the students was asking the editor a question at the end of his speech. The student said, "What is your opinion of the non-peer-reviewed journal?" Non-peer-reviewed journal. The editor was from Germany, and he was very direct. I still remember his answer. He said, "Peer review is what makes science scientific. No peer review, no science. Next question." And I remember just kind of being surprised and thinking, wow, there really is a bias against those non-peer-reviewed journals. So keep that in mind before you send your paper to one. Second, is the journal in the recommended publishing outlet category? Remember, I just showed you the list of those journals that are most likely to say yes. The regional journals, for example, the newer journals. Does the journal have a good reputation? Remember, you want your journal to live longer than you. You don't want to die before your journal. So make sure that your journal has a good company, good university, or good association supporting it, and hopefully for some time. How old is the journal? If it's too young, it's high risk, remember. Less than 2 years old, we're a little bit concerned about it. Let me say something else about age. Very old journals who have been around for a long time often also have a problem. And we don't talk about this problem a lot, but the problem is backlog. Backlog means that some older journals have accepted too many papers. I have seen journals that have a backlog of one journal had 3-year backlog. That means if your paper is accepted, you have to wait your turn to publish 2 or 3 years from now. And often for students, that's just too long. Older journals are much more likely to have a big backlog than newer journals. If the journals just started, they probably don't have that kind of a backlog, and that might be one reason to prefer the journal over 2 years old rather than the very old journal. Is the journal carefully produced? We're trying to take a look at the quality of this journal, so we're looking at things like layout. Does it look like someone cares about this journal? Are the page numbers in the correct space? Has it been spell checked? Do we see a lot of language errors, or is it clean and on time? Does the journal come out on time? That's the next question. We want to see a journal that usually comes out on time. We're worried when we see a journal that comes out late and then later and then later. The reason we're worried about this is that sometimes if a journal comes out late, later, and then later, and then later, this indicates a big problem in the journal. Probably they are not getting enough papers. And because they're not getting enough papers, they have to wait longer every time. And the longer they wait, the fewer papers they get until finally they die. So a journal that's consistently not on time is usually a very bad sign of the end. We want a journal that can be late sometimes, but usually it's on time. Are the authors published on its pages diverse? We want to see a journal that publishes PhD students and senior scholars. We want to see scholars from all over Asia, Europe, and the US. We don't want to only see from the US, for example. We also want to see famous universities and not so famous universities. We want to make sure that we have a fair chance, based on our ideas, to publish in this journal. So we will check through some of the articles to make sure. Does the journal publish more than 5 or 6 articles a year? There are some journals that publish 1 issue every year with 5 or 6 articles. Now the problem with that journal is that if it's full this year, you may have to wait for next year or the year after to publish your paper. A journal that publishes more frequently usually has a shorter backlog or less time to wait because they can get rid of the papers that they accept. Is the journal online? Remember, we want it to be online and hard copy so that it's accessible and credible. Does it take a long time to publish once you submit your manuscript? Okay, here we're talking about 2 things. The first thing is review time, and the second is backlog. Now, review time means after you send your paper to the journal, how long before they tell you yes or no, accept or reject. And the second thing is after they accept you, how long to publish you. Now, review time can vary between, I've seen some journals with 10 days, fantastic review time. I've seen other journals 6 months. I've seen some that have 8 months, crazy long review times. So when you're making a decision and you have, for example, 2 journals and one has a 10-day review time and one has 6 months, you're going to send your paper to the 10-day journal before the 6-month journal probably, just because you'll get a decision back faster. Now, backlog also is a very important point to identify. How do you know backlog? Well, you can ask the assistant editor in an email directly, and I'll show you how in a video coming up in the future. Secondly, one good trick is go to the journal and check the publication date on the cover of the journal, and then turn in the journal to the references at the end of each article and see when is the most recent reference in most of the articles. You can assume that's when the article was written. So you can look at the writing date and the publication date, and you can see what is the gap. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 months? That will give you a good idea of how long you will need to wait before your paper is published after you submit to a journal. Who reads the journal? Oh, is the journal going through a transition? Sometimes when you check the journal website, you will see that the editor is a temporary editor, or you will see that the journal's going through a transition or a change. I avoid journals with a temporary editor, and I'll tell you why. I have seen cases where temporary editors don't like to make publication decisions. They just quietly publish their backlog waiting for the new editor to come in, and they will reject, I believe, a lot more papers while they wait for the new editor to come in. So it might be better to just wait until they appoint a new editor, and then when they have a new editor, now you can submit your paper to that editor, and you know that he knows what he wants and is more likely to give you a review. Finally, who reads the journal? You want to make sure that the people who read your paper can cite your paper and benefit from your research. So how do you know who reads the journal? Well, here's an interesting thing you can try. Go to the journal website, and you'll see a little link on the journal website. It says Information for Libraries. Click on that link, and you will see often the domains or the topics of the scholars that subscribe to that journal. You'll see the total number of subscribers and what the research categories are that they focus on. This is useful because when you write your cover letter to the editor, I suggest that you find 1 or 2 of those research categories and mention in the cover letter that these scholars will appreciate your research and will benefit from what you are writing about and what your research is about. I want to talk for a few minutes about how to match your article to the journal. Now that you've chosen a journal, you know you want to send it to this journal, you want to make your journal paper look like it was born for this journal. Hopefully, the editor will see your paper and say, wow, this paper is perfect. I've been waiting for this paper my whole life. Publish. Okay, that probably won't happen, but you hope that the editor can quickly see the connection between your paper and his journal. I have spoken with editors who complain about getting papers, and it looks like the editor or the author never saw their journal, never read their journal before, because the article's so far from the focus of that journal. So you need to prove to the editor that your paper is perfect for his journal. Otherwise, you may get the desk reject we talked about before, where he rejects you with no review. So let me go through a few things that can be very useful to you when you are when you're matching your article to the journal. First, does the journal have an upcoming theme or special issue on your topic? Now this is a big one. This is important. I have seen this work very well in some of my students' writing laboratory classes. Basically, the journal has 2 types of issue, right? We have the normal issue, which is probably general, lots of little topics, and we have special issue. Special issue is only about one specific issue, one narrow field. Now, who chooses the special issue? It's often the editor. So the editor cares about his special issue. That's his baby. He doesn't want it to fail. Now, editors will complain that they get lots of articles for their general issue, but nobody sends them articles for their special issue. In fact, sometimes special issues have to be canceled because the editor cannot get enough articles to fill that special issue. Now, this is a good opportunity for you. Try to find a journal that's suitable for you, and then try to find a special issue that matches your topic and submit for that special issue. You will get faster review time because the editor is focusing on that upcoming special issue. You don't have to wait in the backlog. You don't have to wait for your turn. You can publish right on the date that the special issue comes out, and the competition is much lower. Basically, the acceptance rate is much higher for the special issue because fewer people are submitting. I'll tell you one story. One time in my writing class, I had this engineering student, and he came to me one day, he said, "Teacher, I found a special issue that's just perfect for me. However, I missed the deadline. The deadline was 2 weeks ago, and so I can't submit. But because I know editors have such a hard time filling the special issue," I told him, I said, "Call the editor and ask him." So the student called the editor, and the editor said, "Please send me your paper tonight. I am trying to get enough articles to fill up my special issue, and I don't have enough." So the student sent him the article. The editor reviewed the article, and that paper was published 3 weeks later. Now, I don't want you to expect this will happen to you, but I want you to understand that special issues are a great opportunity. Don't miss the chance to submit your article to a special issue. Now, how do you find out about special issues? Well, first, journals will often publish a calendar, a schedule, on their website, and they will tell you the upcoming special issues for the next year. For example, I was just looking at a medical journal with one of my medical students, and we saw there was a special issue on infectious disease in Africa, breast cancer, there was something else, I can't remember them all, but there were about 3 or 4 special issues in the next year, and my student's paper perfectly matched the one on breast cancer, so he submitted to that one. I think we have a good chance of publishing. So take a look at the website first. Second, if you can't find it on the website, email the assistant editor or production editor and ask him, "Do you have a special issue on my topic?" And he will tell you what the special issues are for the next year. The good thing is, if nobody put the schedule on the journal website, maybe the competition is very low for your special issue, and maybe you even have a higher chance to publish. Check the special issues. Second, does the journal have word or page length limits you can meet? I say this because sometimes students will submit 40-page papers to a journal that only has a 20-page limit. Journal editors are not kidding about those page limits and word limits. Follow the rules that they give you. Does the style of your article match the journal style? Particularly, are you citing previous articles from that journal to connect to the conversation going on in that journal? Do you know any of the journal editors? If you met a journal editor at a conference, for example, and he encouraged you to submit your paper, don't hesitate to address the editor by name. "Dear Editor Johnson, thank you for encouraging me to submit my paper. Here it is." It can only help you to know the journal editor, and hopefully he will remember you and give you a good chance to publish. How does the journal want their articles to be submitted? Do they want it emailed, hard copy, CD? Do they want a cover letter first? Make sure that you check the submission guidelines before you send your article. Now, here I'm going to teach you how to write a query letter to the assistant editor of a journal. Now, there are at least 2 editors in each journal. Assistant editor or production editor, will operate the day-to-day operations, probably schedule the special issues, send the journal to publish, may even help with finding peer reviews. And so he is a good guy to ask some specific questions. Number one, send him a letter and say, how many submissions a year does your journal receive? Now, I used to ask, in the old days, I used to ask, what is your rejection rate? But I discovered that many times they don't want to tell me that. So I had my students modify their letters that they sent to assistant editors, and now we ask this question, and then we will do the math by ourselves to calculate the rejection rate. So, if he receives 1,000 articles a year, he only accepts 100, I will see what the rejection rate is, and then I can compare the journals to each other. And many times I'm surprised, because you think that high impact factor means high rejection rate, but that's not always true. Sometimes the low impact factor have much higher rejection rate than the high impact factors do. So it pays to calculate this, to see your risk versus reward, your rejection rate versus your impact factor before you submit your paper. Second, what is your journal's turnaround time? Now, turnaround time means review time. How long to tell me I'm accepted or rejected? This can be different. This can be 10 days to 6 months. And if you ask the assistant editor, he will tell you, and this can be important information when you're making your decision. Third, what is your journal's backlog? Now, backlog means after you say yes, how long to publish me, and this can again be very short, like 2 or 3 months, up to several years. So knowing this is important for your publication plan. If you ask the assistant editor, he will tell you. Now, after you ask these questions to the assistant editor, then you will ask, one other thing. For the assistant editor, you can also ask him about special issues that are coming up if you can't find that information on the journal website. Now you're going to write a second letter to the editor, and I believe that this is one of the most important things you can do to increase your chance of publication. Basically, we are going to ask the editor's opinion about our idea, about our paper, but we are not going to send him our paper. Okay, that's important. We have a rule in academic publishing that you can only send one paper to one journal at one time. We cannot send one paper to 2 journals. That's double submission. That's a big problem. However, you can send a letter about your paper and your idea to more than one editor at the same time. And you can use the response from those editors to decide which journal you want to submit your paper to. And this can save you a lot of time. And also, it's kind of a compliment to the editor, because you're telling the editor, I care about your opinion. I want to know whether this is suitable or not. This is fine. In fact, let me show you quickly a letter that we received from Emerald Insight journals. This journal emailed us back, and they told us this: don't forget, you can always email an editor outlining your proposed paper, sending just the abstract is best, to see if they think your paper is suitable. If you have 3 possible journals, send the abstract to all 3 editors. They are usually more than willing to offer advice and will often suggest an alternative journal if they feel their journal is not suitable for your paper. So not only can you email the editor, some journals encourage it, and in fact, some journals require it today more and more. So don't feel uncomfortable about sending this letter. Just don't send your whole paper. That's the key point. Send a letter about your paper. What should you put into your query letter? First, address the editor by name. Find out his name from the website. This is important because sometimes there's more than one editor. One editor is responsible for one area, another for a different area. You want to make sure it's directed to the best editor for your paper. Second, if you met him before, if you know him, don't be afraid to mention that. Good to see you at the conference, for example. Tell him why he should be interested. Now, why would the editor be interested in your paper? Because his readers would be interested in your paper. So go to the journal website and see who his readers are, and tell him about a group of researchers that read his journal that would enjoy your paper, and tell him how they could use your results for their further research. And you should also show a display a knowledge of the journal. What I like to do is look through the journal for the previous year, try to find a related article from his journal, and I will say, my research is continuing research previously published in your journal related to problem. And we are continuing this research in our article. That way you can prove to the editor that you are his reader. You know what he wants. You are continuing his conversation. And then he hopefully will not just throw your paper away. He can see you're trying hard to connect to his audience. Then give him your title and abstract. Tell him how long the article is. Tell him it's not been published before. Of course, that has to be true. Tell him any money you received. This is called conflict of interest. Usually this is not a problem. You just need to tell him where you received money or funding. And finally, what I like to do is add a little problem at the end to get him to give me a review. I will say, for example, please let me know if my focus on this is suitable for your journal, or should I change and focus more on that, if that would be suitable for your journal. Would there be an issue with me submitting my article to your journal? When I mention this little question, it's not really a problem, it's a question, the editor is then much more likely to respond to me, which is what I want. I want him to respond, and I will use his response to make a decision about whether I should send my paper to this journal or not. Let me show you the 4 types of responses that you are likely to get if you send this query letter to the editor. Now, these responses are based on students in my course, in my writing course. I have all of them write letters, query letters to the editor of 5 journals. And then they collect the response from these 5 journals, and then we make a decision about which journal we will submit our article to. Now, the most common response is send it in. I would say 40%, roughly, of editors will say, there's no problem with your article, it's fine, please send it in whenever you're ready. This is good response. My students will feel some time pressure to hurry up, get their paper finished, and submit it. But my favorite response is number 2, a mini review. Sometimes the editor, I would say 20% of the time, all right, just roughly, the editor will write a lot of detailed comments in his letter about things he liked and things he didn't like and things we should change in our article. Now, this tells us that the editor is interested in our article because he took time to give us feedback. This also makes us think that if we can make these changes that the editor is suggesting, we probably have a good chance to publish our paper. One of my students wrote a paper about Chinese political economy, and he sent it to a journal, and I remember we got 3 pages of detailed comments about things we could improve and things that he liked, and this was very encouraging for us because we, in a very short period of time, we were able to get useful feedback from the editor, and we knew that the editor cared about our paper, and we submitted and published in that journal. Now, negative response also happens. Sometimes, maybe 20% of the time, the editor will say, no, we don't like your paper, go away, don't come back. Okay, maybe they're not that bad, but they will say no, and students might feel depressed when we have this letter, but honestly, I am grateful for editors who will reject me, because if you're going to reject me, please reject me quickly so that I can move on to another journal that would be more suitable. What we don't want is to submit our paper to the wrong journal and then wait 3 months and get rejected. We want to get rejected fast if we possibly can, and that's what this query letter will allow. They'll allow you to be rejected quickly so you can move on to somewhere where you have more chance. And then finally, sometimes, maybe 20% of the time, there's no response, nothing. Editor doesn't reply to us at all. Now, I believe this shows perhaps some bad customer service at the journal. I am afraid that if the editor doesn't talk to me now when I have a question about my article, maybe they won't talk to me later when I'm waiting for my peer review. And so I would take this as a negative. I might still submit here, but it wouldn't be my first choice. So let's say we send 5 query letters. We get 2 that say send it in, 1 mini review, 1 negative, 1 no response. Maybe we can eliminate the negative and the no response. We can begin with the mini review. If they reject us, our backup plan is the 2 send it in. But you see how much we can learn from this query letter process. And that's why it's such a great technique that I believe you should try to use when you are writing and submitting a paper time. Well, that's all that I have for you today. I want to refer you for more information to my blog, editing.tw/blog. I have lots of articles and more videos there for you about this topic and others, and you're welcome to join us. I've also written several books on this topic in English and in Chinese, and you can order those from my website, textbooks.tw, as well. I also provide editing and translation service with native English-speaking editors, and we are very good at rewriting and revising Taiwanese research papers for publication in international journals. If you need any help with this, please visit our site, editing.tw. Thank you.